Hi there, Tracy here with another scrapbooking process video. This time I'm using the Sweet Jane kit from the Scraptastic Kit Club and the add-on as well. These are the kits for the month of June. And so I'm starting with two 2.8 by 2.8 photos, and here's the sketch that I'm using. It's the sketch for the month of June and from the Scraptastic Kit Club. And so I'm going to be using that because I like how it has the strips of paper across the back. What you see me doing here is I'm using my Polaroid zip printer, which prints little tiny photos that are 2x3, and I had taken a picture of each of the coloring pages that my girls were working on, because I wanted to include them in the scrapbooking page that I'm doing. So here I am using the software, and if you're interested in this printer, I do have a full review of it coming on my channel on Friday, July 8th, so look for that around that date. And so you saw me print up that first one of my younger daughter's coloring book and or coloring page, and then I sent the other one to print, and while I wait for it to print, because it does take a while for it to run through to transfer the data from my phone to the printer, and then for the printer to actually print it, you see it coming out there. I just trimmed up my photos using my Creative Memories trimmer. And so this is the layout that I'm going to go with, but I noticed that both of those pages have dark spots, not the pages, but the photos of the coloring pages have dark spots on them. And that's just the way that the book kind of sits in the light. It's hard to get a nice photo of it in a regular room. So here I am in my scrap room with my video light. So I thought I would take another picture of each of the pages just to get it right, because it was kind of bugging me that those corners were dark and shady. And you might not, I actually didn't notice it on the camera roll, like on my phone. And you might not have noticed it if I had printed it on my regular printer, but this printer really emphasizes the contrast in a photo. And so you really could see it quite a lot, and it really looked kind of like, it made the pages look kind of dingy instead of bright and colorful. So see how better this one looks as it comes out. I was just grabbing a piece of paper so I can keep track of what I'm going to be doing today. And so the software allows you to move the photo around on your canvas and then print it whatever way you want, however big and in whatever position on the photo you want. This actually prints little stickers, but I'm actually not going to be using the sticker feature of these. I'm just going to use them as a regular photo. So I'm just jotting down the sizes of photos I'm using and stuff like that so that I can tell you. So the square photos that I printed are, of course, 2.8 by 2.8, and then the two coloring pages are printed at 2 by 3, which is the only size that that particular printer prints at. So again, if you're looking for a review of that zip printer, just check out my channel because I do have a review of it. So here I am, and I'm using the sketch to figure out how I want to position my photos. I'm basically treating all 4 photos as being in the place of the one photo in the sketch, because the sketch just calls for a 4x6. So my photo is going to be like the area that covers the photo is going to be a little bit bigger than 4x6, but that's okay. So the first thing that I'm doing is I have that white background paper, the white piece of cardstock, and I'm looking through the pattern paper that comes in the kit. I love that diagonal striped yellow, pink, and red paper. And then I also love the triangle yellow, pink, and red, but those two color schemes are really close to one another. So I'm looking for some other papers that have similar colors but bring in more of the blue for the other ones that I choose. The last minute I decided to switch my background from the plain white cardstock to the pink cardstock. Most of it is going to be covered by the strips of paper anyhow. And so all of these papers are exclusive to the kit this month. And as I kind of tear the strips, I'm tearing it for a little bit of extra interest. As opposed to having really flat edges, it'll have a little bit of a textured and torn edge. And so next to that yellow, pink, and red paper, I'm putting this blue paper, and I like the blue paper because it has lots of white in it, and some of these patterns are quite bold, and so this one provides your eye with a little bit of a resting place, because look at this, it's super bold. And this one is quite bold too. So I'm just deciding which order to put them in, and basically I want some blue showing in this sketchy pattern paper here, because that's part of the reason I chose it, was because it brings the blue into the mix. And now this one I'm going to leave quite a bit bigger than the others. I'm leaving it bigger because there's a lot of space between those flowers, and I want to be able to see the whole pattern, and that it includes lots of clusters of those little flowers. Again, I'm just using my ruler to tear the edges in a straight line so that it doesn't look too messy. And now here's this bold paper, and so I don't need quite as much of it because it is quite bold and the pattern is quite tight. So you'll get to appreciate it no matter how big it is. So I'm going to layer these like this. And I'm just staggering the tops and the bottoms so that some of them are longer than others and some of them are shorter than others. And I want that large floral piece in the middle to be both taller and longer than the other ones. And now, of all the papers to repeat, this is the one that I chose to repeat because it is already different from the other ones. And like I said, because it has all the white in it, it is a bit of a resting spot. And also, most of it will be covered by the photo on the first version of that strip. So I didn't think it was terribly too bad to repeat that pattern on the other side. I wouldn't want to have it be bookends, so I wouldn't want it to have that repeating pattern paper on like one on one end and one on the other end, because that would look too weird. It would be too kind of contrived or strange, because nothing else is symmetrical. So why would that be symmetrical? So it's important that it doesn't kind of stop end on the blue and white paper. And, you know, from a design perspective, you could just pick a fifth piece of pattern paper, or I guess it would be a sixth piece of pattern paper there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah. Because they are all different, but I think that, you know, I got away with repeating this one and having it still look nice because this is the one that is different than any of the other ones. I think if I had repeated any of the other ones, it would have looked uneven. So now I'm just outlining all of these strips of paper with my gray Chamel pen, and I'm triple outlining, and I'm trying to outline in exactly the same spot so that it is a darker gray than what it normally is, because this pen is a very, very light gray. I love this pen. It's a light, warm gray, and it almost looks like pencil marks when you use it just once without overlapping it. And I really, really love that look. I love the look of pencil marks on a layout, but I never put pencil on my layouts because I'm afraid that they'll fade away. And so this marker is perfect for that. I didn't want to outline in black, which is what I usually outline in, because it would provide just a little bit too much contrast. So outlining in the gray brings all of these different patterns together. I almost always outline when I'm using this many pattern papers together, because it does bring them all together and make them feel like they belong. And also it can help to distinguish the edges of them if similar patterns are overlapping with one another, which isn't really the case here. And it can also provide some contrast on your layout, but since I'm using such a light color, it's not providing all that much contrast, but it does give the strips a nice finished look as well. So I'm overlapping these ones, and I don't really care for how lined up the bottoms are on the first two pieces, but I have a feeling I'm going to put some embellishments down there. So I'm not worrying too much about it. I'm going to focus on making sure that the that the tops and the bottoms, like where the strips end, are staggered other than those first two. So I kind of wish I had cut that blue piece of paper, the first blue pattern paper, a little bit longer so that those edges could be a little bit more staggered at the bottom. But again, I'm thinking I can probably just overlap some embellishments with it if it really still looks bad at the end. Right now it looks bad. There's nothing else on the layout, so it kind of stands out as being lined up there more than what it should be. So here I am using my sewing machine, and I am stitching vertical stitch lines down the edges of each of the strips. So on the inside, on each of the edges, so on the left edge and on the right edge. And I was going to do lots and lots of stitching all over all of the papers, and I was going to do some zigzag and some like really messy stitching, but I did one zigzag and then I changed my mind. So there is one stray zigzag line down this layout that doesn't seem to belong because it's not repeated anywhere, but it's pretty subtle and I don't think that you notice it, and it just ends up being a neat little detail, I guess. It's a little bit of a mistake that I made. I wasn't quite thinking it through. So now with the overlapped, I guess I probably should have glued and then stitched and then glued and then stitched, because where these papers overlap, I need to pull up papers so that I can stitch, so that the stitching can disappear under the layers. I have to kind of pull them up like this so that I can stitch a little ways down on each of the papers. But that's okay. I just glued them in the middle because I knew I was going to be stitching, and I prefer not to stitch over glue. I do stitch over glue, but I try not to. So because they're only glued down in the middle, it's pretty easy for me to pull back the edges of some of those top layers so that I can get at the bottom layers to do some sewing. And sewing is really fast when you speed it up 4 times. So now I'm just going to take my scissors and cut all of the stray ends off of this project. And because I don't do any back stitching, I'm going to use some washi tape. You'll see me do that. And I'm cutting all of these thread ends off all the way, so I'm not leaving any tails hanging or anything. I usually only ever leave the tail ends of threads hanging if I'm using a layout that has a lot of negative space and maybe like a nice white background or something that makes them look kind of whimsical and dreamy looking. And this layout is just doesn't have that look. So I would rather have the sewing have nice neat ends than have the dangling threads. So I'm just using some washi tape from my stash to trim up and cover up the ends of where the stitching was, because I don't want it to come apart as I handle the layout. Now, I felt like those photos were going to disappear on those pattern papers in the background, so I want to mat all of the photos onto one piece of gray cardstock. And so you see I pulled out a whole bunch of gray there. I normally have a good stash of gray and white cardstock, different shades of gray. Like I have multiples of all the different shades of gray. But in this case, I've used them all up and I'm down to my last couple of sheets of gray paper. On the last layout that I did for scrapbooking cards today, I actually had one single piece of gray paper in that shade, and I had to make it last me through a layout that involved lots of precision cutting and stuff. So it was pretty intense trying to not mess up on that layout. But on this one, I have plenty of room for messing up because although I don't have another page of the same shade, I don't need to use the whole thing. So at first I was going to give this lots of room to breathe by leaving quite a large gray border around the edges of it. And then I decided to trim it down a little bit. And I trimmed that one a little bit too close on the edge there. And so unfortunately you can't take it back once you cut it off. So I just pulled up the photo very gently and scooched it over a little tiny bit so that the edges were the same on each side. Now here I am pulling up these edges, and I always regret doing this at this phase because I don't know where anything is going to be, and I pull them up and then I always end up having to glue them back down again when I put my embellishments over top. So I'm always afraid that I'm going to forget to pull up those edges at the end, and that's why I do it at this point, but it really is not a very efficient way to do it. So this is the cut apart sheet that comes in the add-on for the kit, and I'm going to use it for my journaling. I'm going to have a bit of trouble with the journaling. You'll see in a second. So first of all, I don't need that much of it. And I want it to be really horizontal like the one in the sketch. And so I cut off the first couple of lines. And I learned that when you use this trimmer really fast, it can bow, meaning it cuts a slightly curved if you're not really, really careful. You don't have to be really, really careful. You just have to be a little bit more careful than I just was. So I was really fast and it just cut it in a little bit of a curved line. So I put some adhesive on it and then I changed my mind and rubbed the adhesive right off. That's what I love about the ATG, is that you can remove the adhesive if you want to, just by rubbing it on your finger. And I decided instead to attach this journaling piece that was from the cut aparts in the kit. I've decided to attach it to an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and I'm going to put it through my typewriter. So first I'm going to do up my journaling. And so I'm just handwriting it with another Chamel pen there. It's just, I don't like that pen very much. The only Chamel pen that I like is the gray one. This one is kind of, it keeps running out even though it's pretty new. But anyhow, I'm just using it for my scratch journaling. And then I'm going to run this through my typewriter, but I'm going to have trouble with my typewriter because my kids, I saw them playing with the typewriter and I was too late. They had already, I told them to, that it's an old typewriter and that they couldn't play with it. But they said, okay, good. And they walked away and they act really compliant and good. And now I'm realizing that before I found out that they were playing with it, they had moved some of the things around and they had moved some dials and some levers on it so that my typewriter is actually not typing. It's just hammering up the little letters onto the card, but not moving the ribbon up so that it's not tapping the ribbon. And therefore it's the letters are empty. I'm just getting the indent of the letters, and then whatever ink is left on the letters from the last time I typed is all that's going on my journaling card. And I'm like, what is going on? It's so light gray and I can't figure out what's wrong. And also the paper isn't very tight in the roller. And I'm like, what is going on? So I thought maybe I had run out of ribbon. And it turns out, as you know, my kids had changed some of the settings. So I had to go online and figure out what on earth was going wrong. So I took a look at the ribbon and unwound it a little bit, and it's still not working, but you can see why it's not working. It's not working because, see, that is supposed to go up before you type, and it's not doing that. So I'm like, what is going on? And then I figured out there's a little lever down there on the right hand side that goes black, clear, and red, and it was unclear. So yeah, I have no interest in typing in clear. I don't know why anybody would. And then I also had to go online and figure out what was going on with my roller. But I did figure it out, and here is the typing. I don't usually cut out my process, but that was pretty lengthy and boring, so I did cut that part out. So I matted my journaling on the gray just to give it a little bit more substance relative to the photos and to tie it in with the photos because they're matted in that gray. And now I really want to, because the title of this is going to be Color Your World, I really want to use a multicolored font. And these multicolored fonts, this set of thickers came in a not too old Scraptastic kit. It wasn't too long ago that this came. I never use these multicolored letter stickers because, I don't know. I love the look of them and I love them on other people's layouts, but I just never use them for some reason or another. And so when I'm talking about coloring and I'm using a title like Color Your World, this is an opportunity for me to definitely use these letter stickers. So you'll notice that they had never been used. They're awesome and I love them, but they had never been used. So I pulled them out, even though they're from a different kit. They're from maybe 2 or 3 months ago. I don't know. Anyhow, I really love them, and I'm just trying to randomize the prints that I'm choosing for my title. I'm going to do all 3 words in this font. Spelling out color your world. And I'm not trying to repeat the pattern or anything. I just want it to be completely random. And the sketch calls for the title to be staggered, like color on like the 3 words to be on 3 different lines, but I've decided to not do that. I'm going to put your and world on the same line. And now I'm trying to think about what am I going to mat these on, because they're going to get lost on the background paper as well. You know, remember how I mentioned that my photos would get lost, and so I matted them. So I feel like I need to mat this title as well. But I didn't want to introduce a new pattern. There's lots of pattern paper on this layout, and then the letter stickers themselves introduce more patterns. So I'm going to mat these on a piece of vellum. And vellum is awesome because it's see-through. I wish I had left my letters a little bit more spaced because I didn't realize I was going to outline them when I was spacing them. Whenever you plan to outline the outsides of your letters, just try to give yourself a little bit more wiggle room in between your letters so that you can fit the tip of your pen in between them more easily than what I'm going to find. So the nice thing about lettering on vellum is that it is see-through, and so you can just put it on a piece of graph paper or your grid mat if you have one, and just line them up very, very easily. I just used my Zig 2-way glue pen to fix one of the letters that was separating. Some of the layers were separating. And now I'm going to cut a kind of rectangular strip. And I noticed that it was 3 inches. So I'm going to cut 2 more strips of vellum that are 3 inches, because I wasn't sure, and now I'm going to just trim it down so that it fits on the page. I wasn't sure how thin or thick I wanted the vellum to be. And so see how when it's really thin, I don't get the contrast that I really want. So I know I want to use at least 2 sheets of this vellum so that the words will really stand out from the background patterns. And now after I went away and made lunch and came back, I decided I'm actually going to go ahead and use all 3 layers. And that just makes it quite a bit more opaque than a single layer. But you can still see the pattern papers behind it, which I really like. And so I just marked the center of the right-hand edge of that and used my scissors. I used my scissors to cut a fishtail banner. And now I'm going to use my regular ATG adhesive to adhere these pieces down. And I want the banner to layer underneath of both of those matted gray elements. So below it's going to layer under the journaling and also stick itself under the photos as well, but not butt right up against it. I want to have a little sliver of the vellum between the C and the Y and the gray from the photos, the gray matting of the photos. And I wanted to bring in this fishtail banner just a little bit more. So you saw me just trim it down right there. I kept the same shape, I just moved it in a little bit to give the banner a little bit of breathing space on the other side, on the right side. And I'll tell you what I'm doing right now in just a second. But the reason I wanted to leave a little bit of breathing space over on the right side, on the edges of the banner, on the banner tail, is that you'll notice on the left-hand side, there's a little bit of space between where my photos are and the edge of the layout. And so I didn't want that banner to look like it was running off the edge of the paper because of the layout, because on the other side, nothing runs off the edge, except for the background papers. So the background papers do run off the edge. But I just like to keep things consistent on both sides in that way. And so here I'm messing around with some gel pens. So I have 2 different gel pens out. First, I had my Jelly Roll, which is a beautiful white gel pen, and I love it. It's becoming my favorite over my Signo Uniball, but it doesn't roll very well on vellum. You saw me kind of trying it out on one of the scraps, and it just wasn't rolling right. So then I took the glaze gel pen, which comes out clear and then it dries to a white. There are two different glazes, so one is clear, so make sure you don't pick the clear one. But I had the white one, and it dries to like a shiny, a watery looking, it dries to a glaze, a white glaze. So I started outlining the letters in my glaze pen, in my white glaze pen, which is also by Sakura, which is the same company that makes the jelly rolls. But the problem that I had with that was that I wasn't sure if it was going to be bold enough. So I checked my little swatch book, and the souffle pen, which is also by Sakura, and it just dries to, instead of drying to a glaze, it dries to a matte white. And so I switched pens just to see if it would make a big difference, and it sort of made enough of a difference that I switched to the souffle. And I'll just go back. Any parts that are shiny, that look shiny, you'll see me go back and I'll just go over them with the souffle pen to cover up the shininess from the glaze pen. Because right now the heart and the R are outlined in glaze, and the rest of the letters in the word color are outlined in souffle pen. So here I am just going through some of the embellishments that come in the kit. I knew I wanted to put a little arrow pointing to the flowers because that space is kind of blank on the journaling card. And then I just grabbed some of the flowers. You saw me just kind of grab some flowers and kind of place them in those two different places so that they're kind of flanking the title. And I love how the flowers kind of start on the journaling card and then they continue off the journaling card in die cut form. I really like that. I love it when you have elements in both paper and die cut formats. So I was having a look at some of the word stickers that come in the kit to see if there's anything. Here I am just going back, and I am covering over any shiny parts of those letters, and I am going to, and I always intended to outline all of the letters. I just switched gears and wanted to think about something else for a little bit. So here I am, and I'm wishing that I had left more space between these letters because I can't quite get my pen in between all of them, but that's okay. It's you can't really see where the pen didn't get to outline. You do have to be patient with this pen because it doesn't look very white at first because it gradually dries to a very slightly puffiness. That's why it's called a souffle pen. It kind of raises just a tiny bit, just noticeably off the page. And it also, the color becomes more opaque as it dries as well. And it does dry to quite an opaque finish. And again, those are souffle pens by Sakura. So I'm using my Zig pen to glue this tiny little arrow to fill that space in the journaling card. And then I thought that flare badge filled the other space in the journaling card quite nicely. And then I'll layer these flowers so that they look like they continue right off the journaling card and onto the layout. I outlined the heart in my gray Chamel pen and added a couple of little sketchy lines, which I do when my outlining looks messier than I intended. I add some sketchy lines to make it look like I meant for it to be messy. Some either little scallops or little stitchy lines. And so here I'm just going to do the same thing on the top, and some of these die cuts I'm partially laying flat and then adding a dimensional adhesive to have part of it pop up. I'm going to do that with this. So I'm just putting the pop dot or the dimensional adhesive on the top part of this heart embellishment. And I just have to tuck everything. Things weren't really going in the right spots, so I had to tuck things down. And then this little turquoise heart, I'm just going to layer over here. I wished I hadn't put it down because at the end I'm going to put a final touch on that yellow flower that I wish I had better space for, but that's okay. And now these are the Puffy Dot stickers from Fancy Pants that came in the kit. And I'm just going to put one in the center of each flower that is not covered. And then I'm going to put two more in each of those clusters so that there's a total of 3 puffy dots in each of the clusters. There are some flowers in each of the clusters. There's a heart square die cut piece in each of the clusters, and then there's a resin or acrylic heart in each of the two clusters as well. I'm going to put a word sticker on each of the coloring sheets. One says awesome and one says mission accomplished because Sophie actually finished hers. And now I'm going to take this patterned strip sticker from the sticker set, and I just felt like the clusters were missing a little something, so I'm adding a bit of it to each of the clusters, and that repetition helps these clusters look like they belong and kind of makes everything feel cohesive. And now this little die cut here, it says, "This is where the fun happens," and it's all different colored letters to make up that phrase. And so I thought it was perfect for this layout about coloring. And so now I feel like I'm done, but I don't want to splatter any sprinkles of any mist or anything, but I felt like it needed just a couple of extra touches of something dimensional. So when you're looking to add some dimension, you can always add a layer of paper by using your punches. And so I'm just going to glue these down, but if I wanted even more dimension, I could have stapled them to the layout and then pulled up the edges of it, or you could do that with butterflies too. That's a really great way to add dimension at the end of your page. If you just feel like it's missing a little something, it's a great way to do it. But I'm just going to punch it and glue it down. I thought about layering another heart over this heart that goes with the title, but they look too weird. I can't get them to layer right, so I'm going to just forget it after a little bit of fiddling and fussing. Still thinking about it. And now I'm going to my stash and I'm getting my Nouveau crystal drops. And I'm going to add a bit of dimension to all of these flowers. All of the white dots I'm going to cover with same colored dots from my Nouveau drops collection here. And this one just gets too messy. I'm trying to put the tiniest little dots on this, and the dots are just too tiny. I can't do it. So it's kind of like a blob more than individual dots, but that's okay. And this one turns out a little bit better, but one of the dots becomes a bit of a blob, but that's okay. Again, you know what? It's a handmade scrapbooking page. It's not going to be perfect, and it's okay. I did my best to make little tiny dots that were much smaller than the nozzle is, so it's really hard to do that. These dots are much easier to make, but as I mentioned, I'm wishing I hadn't laid that acrylic heart down, because I would have liked to have put an extra dot on, like behind where that heart is, but that's okay. At the last minute, I added a Nouveau drop to each of the punched hearts that I just added, just for that little bit more dimension. And we'll call this one done. I just wanted to show you this is what the package of Nouveau crystal drops look like. They come in this little bottle. It's a really cute bottle. It has a giant gem on the top of it too. So here are the close-ups of this layout. I did pop dot the photos so that they all, I don't think I mentioned that, they all pop up and create a bit of shadow on that gray cardstock mat, which I really like that. So there you get to see how those Nouveau drops turned out. They're not perfect, but they're there, and they add a little smudge of dimension and intense color to the centers of those flowers. I almost wish I hadn't put those puffy dots in the centers of the other ones, because I would have liked to have put dots in all of the flowers, but I think it looks nice the way it is too. So here are the photos of the layout. I hope you guys enjoyed this process video. I really love how the white outlining just makes those letter stickers pop out a little tiny bit. It's a very, very subtle difference. You can barely see it, but it's almost like the opposite of having a shadow around a letter. And those little details are one of my favorite parts of scrapbooking, is just taking the time to add those little details. And you'll notice that my typewriting is kind of messy there, but that's okay. It looks very vintage and old-fashioned, and you can tell that it was typed with a real typewriter instead of just on a printer using typewriter font. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you all have a really great scrappy week.